Good morning, everybody. I am so excited for us to really get all of our learning back on track and seeing everyone's faces. So I'm just thrilled that we're getting to do this now. Before we start, I just want to remind everybody that this is new for everybody. I have never taught this way before. You have never learned this way before. We're using different programs and different things, so it can be confusing. So don't feel bad if things seem a little bit tough. It's a whole new experience for everybody. Before we actually get started with this lesson, I'll just give you a little bit of an overview of what the week will look like. So every day when you wake up, there'll be a new video for you to watch on the NEABSCO website on my page, and you'll watch it, and then you will get to pick an activity to do from a choice board. That way you can practice the skill that we just did together on this video. And then after you do that, at 9:10 in the morning, so a little bit after 9 o'clock, you can join me on Zoom, which is a way that we can video chat with each other, and I can answer any questions that you have, or if you don't have any questions and you just want to pop in and say hi and see how things are going, that would be great. I would love to see all of your faces. I actually recorded our math lesson for later in this week before this, so you'll hear all of that again during math because I forgot what order we were doing things in this week. Like I said, it's new. We're all figuring it out. So yeah, today we are going to do some language arts, which is our reading and our writing. Before we start that, some of you might have read these books before. Maybe it was during school, another place. That's fine. We're going to read them again, and it will be all right. So today, during our read aloud, we're just going to be focusing on trying to retell our story. So if you remember when we were still in school, we were using a retell rope. And this one is not as fancy as the one that I had in school because that's still there. But I'll hold it up so you can see. It's the same thing. It has a house for the setting. Remember, the setting is where the story takes place, where and when. So a story, you can tell a story about people or things who are living in a house. That would be the setting. It can also mean when, so the time. Maybe it was in the morning, maybe it was in the afternoon. That's our setting. The next one is our characters. Now, in this retell rope, it has pictures of people as the characters. But we know that characters don't just have to be people, right? Characters can be anybody in the story that thinks or feels. So maybe there's animals who have emotions and they're feeling different ways and doing different things. Or you think about maybe in Beauty and the Beast when all of the furniture came to life and they were talking and doing things and interacting with each other. All of those things that think and feel, those are characters in a story. The next one, when we move down, that is the beginning. In the beginning of the story. So what happens when you first start reading? What is the first thing to happen, right? That is the beginning of our story. If we go down again, now we're in the middle. The middle part, that happens after the beginning. So a lot of times in the middle of the story, there's a lot of things happening. Maybe it gets really exciting. You're like wondering what's going to happen next. That's usually what's happening in the middle of the story. The last thing down here, that is the end. How the story ends is the very last thing that happens. Usually if there was a problem, the problem is solved. It's the last thing to happen. You read the end, you close the book, it is done, right? So we've used our retell rope a lot in school. This one looks a little bit different because it's on a piece of paper and not on a real rope, but all in the same pictures and things that we did in the classroom. So we're going to use this to help us try and retell the story that we're going to read today. All right? Ooh, and before we actually start reading the story, there's a couple of other things that we do when we're reading that we're not on our retell rope. One of the things that we do is we make predictions. Let's think, what does making a prediction mean? Did you remember? Making a prediction is when we make a guess, a hypothesis, right? We're thinking, oh, what do we think is going to happen next? Now, our predictions, they're not always right, and they're not always wrong, but that's okay. That's why we keep reading to find out if we were right or wrong. But our predictions, that's all just making a guess about what we think is going to happen. And the other thing that we did a lot of practicing in school is making connections to the story, right? Can you go like this? Do you remember making those connections? That's when if you're reading a story, or maybe even a friend is telling a story, or you hear something and you think, you know what, me too. Or that reminds me of a time when this thing happened. That's making a connection to the story, right? Or making a connection to something. Before I start reading this story, I need to make sure everybody knows that I have full permission from Scholastic to read their stories and all of the other stories. I just need to make sure I say that before I read any of them. So this story, we can look at the title, A Chair for My Mother, the title, the name of the book, right? And it is written and illustrated by Vera B. Williams. So Vera, she not only wrote the words, but she drew the pictures also, right? Authors write the words and illustrators draw the pictures in our stories. So let's go ahead. I know some of us read it when we were in school on the last day, but not a lot of us were here, so I thought this would be a good one to start reading. All right. Now, you might not be able to see the words, but the pictures are nice and big, so that's good. My mother works as a waitress in the Blue Tile Diner. After school, sometimes I go to meet her there. Then her boss, Josephine, gives me a job too. I wash the salts and the peppers and fill the ketchups. One time, I peeled all the onions for the onion soup. When I finish, Josephine says, "Good work, honey," and pays me. And every time, I put half of my money into the jar. So, we've already met one character. Think in your brain, who is this character that we've already met? All of the people that they were just talking about, right? They've talked about the mother, how she works in the diner, right? But the diner wouldn't be a character because the diner doesn't do anything. Her mom is the one who works. And then the person who's telling the story, they're a character also. They're talking about how they get paid to help sometimes. It takes a long time to fill a jar this big. Every day when my mother comes home from work, I take down the jar. My mama empties all her change from tips out of her purse for me to count. Then we push all of the coins into the jar. Sometimes my mama is laughing when she comes home. Sometimes she's so tired she falls asleep while I count the money out into piles. Some days she has lots of tips. Some days she only has a little. Then she looks worried. But each evening, every single shiny coin goes into the jar. And you know what? On this page, I can make a connection because this jar right here, it reminds me of the jar that I have downstairs. Every time I have change, I put it into the jar, and then when it fills up, I get to buy something big. Or sometimes not so big, but whatever the money is that's in the jar. We sit in the kitchen to count the tips. Usually, Grandma sits with us too. While we count, she likes to hum. Often she has money in her old leather wallet for us. Whenever she gets a good bargain on tomatoes or bananas or something she buys, she puts the savings and they go into the jar. When we can't get a single other coin into the jar, we are going to take all the money and go buy a chair. Yes, a chair. A wonderful, beautiful, fat, soft armchair. We will get the one covered in velvet with roses all over it. We are going to get the best chair in the whole world. That is because our old chair is burned up. There is a big fire in our other house. All of our chairs burned. So did our sofa, and so did everything else. That wasn't such a long time ago. So what did we just find out here on this page? We found out that they used to have a lot of chairs and things, right? But then what happened? What did they say? Everything burned up, right? So maybe there was a fire. My mother and I were coming home from buying new shoes. I had new sandals. She had new pumps. We were walking to our house from the bus. We were looking at everyone's tulips. She was saying she liked red tulips, and I was saying I liked yellow ones. Then we came to our block. This is a good page for us to think about a prediction to make. So the girl is talking about the time when her and her mom went to the store and they had a great day and they bought a whole bunch of stuff. But then they came to our block. So let's make a prediction, a guess. What do we think is going to happen next? Let's think. I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. Let's see. Right outside our house stood 2 big fire engines. I could see lots of smoke. Tall orange flames came out of the roof. All the neighbors stood in a bunch across the street. Mama grabbed my hand and we ran. My Uncle Sandy saw us and ran to us. Mama yelled, "Where's Mother?" I yelled, "Where's my grandma?" My Aunt Ida waved and shouted, she's here, she's okay, don't worry." Grandma was all right. Our cat was safe too, though it took a while to find her. But everything else in our whole house was spoiled. So I'm thinking about how they're feeling right now. How do you think that they're feeling? Yeah, I don't think that they're feeling very happy. I wouldn't feel very happy if I came home and all of my things were burning up. Probably feel very sad. What was left of the house was turned to charcoal and ashes. We went to stay with my mother's sister, Aunt Ida, and Uncle Sandy. Then we were able to move into the apartment downstairs. We painted the walls yellow. The floors were all shiny, but the rooms were very, very empty. The first day we moved in, the neighbors brought pizza and cake and ice cream, and they brought a lot of other things too. The family across the street brought a table and 3 kitchen chairs. The very old man next door gave us a bed from when his children were little. My other grandpa brought us his beautiful rug. My mother's other sister, Sally, had made us red and white curtains. Mama's boss, Josephine, brought pots and pans, silverware and dishes. My cousin brought me her own stuffed bear. Everyone clapped when my grandma made a speech. "You are all the kindest people," she said, "and we thank you very, very much. It's lucky we're young and can start all over." So all of their neighbors and family and friends were very kind to them. They helped bring a whole bunch of new things to their new place. That was last year, but we still have no sofa and no big chairs. When Mama comes home, her feet hurt. "There's no good place for me to take a load off my feet," she says. When Grandma wants to sit back and hum and cut up potatoes, she has to get as comfortable as she can on a hard kitchen chair. So that is how come Mama brought home the biggest jar so she could find it at the diner, and all the coins started to go into the jar. Now the jar is too heavy for me to lift down. Uncle Sandy gave me a quarter. He had to boost me up so I could put it in. Take a look at the picture. Their jar is all filled up now, all the way to the top. They said that they were going to do something when they filled up their jar. Does anyone remember? do you think? Make a prediction. What do you think they're going to do now that their jar's all filled up? See if your prediction was right. After supper, Mama and Grandma and I stood in front of the jar. Well, I never would have believed it, but I guess it's full, Mama said. My mother brought home little paper wrappers for the nickels and dimes and the quarters. I counted them all and wrapped them all up. On my mother's day off, we took all the coins to the bank. The bank exchanged them for $10 bills. Then we took the bus downtown to shop for our chair. Were you right? Did you predict that they were going to go get their new chair? We shopped through 4 furniture stores. We tried out big chairs and smaller ones, high chairs and low chairs, soft chairs and harder ones. Grandma said she felt like Goldilocks and the 3 little bears trying out all of the chairs. Finally, we found the chair we were all dreaming of, and the money in the jar was enough to pay for it. We called Aunt Ida and Uncle Sandy. They came right down in their pickup truck to drive the chair home for us. They knew we couldn't wait for it to be delivered. I tried out our chair in the back of the truck. Mama wouldn't let me sit there when we drove, but they let me sit in it while they carried it up to the door. We set the chair right behind the window with the red and white curtains. Grandma and Mama and I all sat in it while Aunt Ida took our picture. Now Grandma sits in it and talks with people going by in the daytime. Mama sits and watches the news on TV while she comes home from her job. After supper, I sit with her and she can reach right up and turn out the light if I fall asleep on her lap. And then there's pictures of everyone enjoying their chair and enjoying each other. So let's think. Before we started reading the story, I wanted you to think in your brain about what it means to retell a story. I want you to be able to tell me, I can retell a story, right? So let's look at our retell rope. The very first one, that's our setting. When and where did the story happen? Where did it happen? Did you figure it out? So where it happened was at work, right? And at home and at the chair store. The story took place in a few different places, right? So that's our setting for where. What about when? When did it happen? Do we know if it was like morning, afternoon, at nighttime, daytime? This doesn't really tell us, but we know that it didn't all happen in one day, right? Because they had to work a long time for it. So when was kind of a long period of time. Our next one is the characters, right? And we talked a little bit about the characters. The characters were all those people that they talked about in the story. But we had 3 kind of main characters that they talked about a lot. They talked about the little girl who was telling the story. They talked about the mom and grandma, right? Those were the people who lived together, who were really working hard for that chair. Now we come to the beginning, middle, and end. Very, very beginning of the story. What's going on in the very beginning? Do you remember? So in the very, very beginning of the story, they kind of just introduce us to all of the characters, right? They talk about where they're working, and here I can open this up so we can see. So in the very beginning, it talks about where they work and that they're saving up money. The very beginning, the very first things that happen, right? Next, we have the middle. The middle of the story where a lot of exciting things happen. Doesn't really have to be happy exciting, but there's a lot going on. So in the very middle of our story, we find something out, right? This was a sad middle of our story. is when we found out that their house burned down, they lost all of their things, right? So that was the middle of the story when we found out there was a problem. In the very end, let's see, in the end of our story, that's the very last thing that happens, right? So do you remember how the story ended? What happened at the very end, the last part that we read? They got something, right? Did they go to the store? They used their money to buy something? Their chair, right? The very end, we found out that they got their chair that they worked really hard for. All right. Nice job, my friends. I hope that you liked listening to the story, and I hope that you were able to answer all the questions. And now that we went over this again, I hope that you were able to tell me I can retell a story. So what your job is now is you are going to go and look at our choice board that we have on the website, and you are going to go ahead and pick one thing to review retelling a story. All right? So that is your job. We are going to do a writing lesson in just a minute, and then after you watch that, you can go ahead and join me on Zoom.